Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bites. Today we're diving into some really fascinating stuff. The sacred books of China, the texts of Confucianism.
Ooh.
It might sound a little dry at first glance, I know, but trust me, this deep dive is going to transport us back to ancient China, a world full of rituals and values that might surprise you with how relatable they still are.
You know what's really intriguing about these texts? They give us a glimpse into the very heart of ancient Chinese society. We're talking about ceremonies for every stage of life, strict social structures, and that all-important concept of filial piety, respect for your elders and ancestors.
Okay, so let's paint a picture for our listeners. Imagine ancient China as this meticulously structured society like a pyramid.
Mhm.
At the top, you have the son of heaven, the king,
Right.
and you have princes and different ranks of officers, and finally, the common people.
And what's amazing is this hierarchy wasn't just about power. It was woven into every aspect of life. Clothing, colors, rituals, responsibilities, you name it.
Yeah, it's like their whole world was built on this idea of order and hierarchy. Every detail had its place.
Exactly. The texts actually go into great detail about how each rank had specific visual markers. Like, for instance, the king's authority was symbolized by these jade bead pendants of the royal cap.
Wow.
And the way these pendants swayed as he walked was believed to reflect the harmony he brought to the universe.
Now, that's some serious symbolism. It's like
Yeah.
every little thing was designed to reinforce this social order. So within this highly structured society, life was essentially a tapestry of rituals.
Absolutely. These ceremonies govern just about every aspect of life you can think of, from birth and marriage to death and ancestor worship. They weren't just empty traditions either. They were seen as vital for maintaining harmony between the human and spiritual realms.
Now, so let's dive into a few of these ceremonies. I'm really curious about the capping ceremony. This marked a young man's transition into adulthood. I'm picturing a grand event where they place a special cap on his head, symbolizing his new responsibilities in society.
You got it. And during the ceremony, he would also receive a new name, an appellation that signified his entry into adulthood.
So it's like a whole new identity,
Yeah.
marking this important life change.
Exactly. Imagine the weight of that moment. Receiving a name that would basically define your place in society.
It must have been both exciting and daunting at the same time. Now, marriage, as such a fundamental institution, I imagine it was also steeped in ritual.
Oh, absolutely. Marriage wasn't just about two individuals, it was a merging of two families.
A union of family.
A union of families. So you can picture the meticulous preparations, families exchanging gifts, consulting oracles, performing all sorts of rituals leading up to the big day.
Wow, it's fascinating how much emphasis they placed on ensuring good fortune and ancestral blessings for the couple. What about the ceremony itself? Are there any particularly striking moments?
One image that really stands out from the texts is the bride following the groom during the ceremony, symbolizing her acceptance of his leadership and their shared journey in building a life together.
It's incredible how these rituals provided a framework for navigating these major life transitions. But of course, life isn't all joyful occasions. I'm guessing death and mourning were also marked by specific rituals.
Indeed. The texts outline very specific rules about mourning attire and conduct, and these rules vary depending on the mourner's relationship to the deceased. Forget black, though. In ancient China, white was the color of mourning.
Oh, wow, interesting. So what did these mourning rituals actually look like?
Well, imagine this. For parents, children were expected to wear coarse, unhemmed sackcloth for a period of 27 months, called Chen Sui. And during that time, they'd lead a very austere life. Abstaining from all sorts of pleasures, it was all about demonstrating the depth of their grief and their filial piety.
That's a really powerful visual representation of their devotion. And I assume other relatives had different mourning periods.
Precisely. The closer the relationship, the longer and more intense the mourning. There was even this ritual called calling back the dead.
Calling back the dead.
Calling back the dead. A symbolic attempt to recall the deceased's soul back to the body.
Wow, that's intense.
It really highlights their belief in the continued presence of ancestors.
It's striking how family and a respect for elders are woven into every aspect of life, from birth to death. It all seems to come back to this idea of filial piety, wouldn't you say?
You're absolutely right. Filial piety, or jiao, was really the bedrock of Confucianism. It encompassed respect, obedience, and care for your parents, both in life and after death.
And the texts don't just talk about it in abstract terms, do they?
No, not at all. They're full of vivid examples. Like one passage that always comes to mind describes children warming their parents' beds in winter
Hmm.
and cooling them in summer, a physical manifestation of their devotion.
Wow, that's incredible.
And sons were even taught to avoid mentioning their own old age in front of their parents, out of respect.
It's almost like they were trying to shield their parents from the realities of time and aging. It's a level of deference that's hard to grasp in our modern world.
Indeed. And even the government reinforced this value. Individuals with parents or grandparents aged 80 or 90 were granted exemptions from service so they could care for them.
Wow, so they really put their money where their mouth was.
They absolutely did.
So we've explored the social hierarchy, the rituals for major life events, and this central role of filial piety. It really paints a vivid picture of a society where order and respect were paramount. But I'm curious, how did they ensure these values were passed down to the next generation? What about education?
Education was highly valued in ancient China. It was seen as crucial for cultivating virtuous individuals who would uphold the social order.
I'm picturing these ancient classrooms, students diligently practicing calligraphy, reciting poetry, debating philosophical concepts. Was it accessible to everyone, or was it reserved for the elite?
Well, the texts describe a system of schools, culminating in the Grand College at the capital. And this path was open to anyone who demonstrated academic excellence, regardless of their social standing.
So even within this rigid hierarchy, there was a recognition of merit.
Exactly. They even had rankings, with select scholars and eminent scholars standing out.
So there was a way for those with talent to rise through the ranks. What about the content of their education? What were they aiming for?
It wasn't just about accumulating knowledge. The goal was to mold individuals who embodied virtue and would contribute to a harmonious society. And this is where it gets interesting. Music played a huge role.
Music. That's not what usually comes to mind when I think of ancient education.
Right. But they believed music wasn't just entertainment. It was a powerful tool for shaping character and promoting social harmony.
So like a form of moral education.
Exactly. Specific melodies and instruments were associated with different virtues.
Yeah.
And listening to the right kind of music was believed to cultivate those virtues within the individual.
Wow, that's a completely different way of thinking about music than we do today.
It really is. It underscores the interconnectedness they saw between every aspect of life, from music and education to ritual and social order.
It's amazing how much we can learn about a society by delving into their texts and traditions. What's clear is that ancient China was a world far more complex and nuanced than we often imagine.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface, but maybe we should take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. What stands out to you from this initial exploration?
What really strikes me is the sheer attention to detail, the symbolism woven into every aspect of life. It's like they were creating a living, breathing embodiment of their values.
That's a great observation. It really is a testament to the power of ritual and tradition in shaping a society's worldview. But before we get carried away, we have so much more to uncover. Are you ready to continue our deep dive into the world of ancient Chinese governance and that intriguing concept of the mandate of heaven?
Absolutely. Listeners, join us in part 2 as we explore how these ancient principles shape the political landscape of ancient China. Until then, keep those minds curious.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the sacred books of China, the texts of Confucianism. Last time we were immersed in the intricate world of ancient Chinese rituals and the profound importance of filial piety.
It was fascinating to see how every aspect of life, from clothing to mealtimes, was imbued with symbolism and meaning. But today I'm really eager to shift our focus to the realm of governance. How did these ancient texts shape the way they viewed leadership and the role of the state?
Well, what's striking is that they didn't separate governance from morality. For the ancient Chinese, a true leader wasn't just someone who held power. They were expected to embody virtue and lead by example.
So it's like the ruler was seen as the moral compass for the entire society. Did these texts provide any specific guidelines for how a ruler should conduct themselves?
Absolutely. One of the texts, the Royal Regulations, lays out a comprehensive set of principles for good governance, covering everything from the conduct of officials to the administration of justice.
So these royal regulations were like a blueprint for creating a harmonious and prosperous society. What were some of the key principles they emphasized?
One that really stands out is the idea of meritocracy. They believed that positions of authority should be filled by individuals with both talent and virtue, not just those born into privilege.
That's a pretty progressive concept for their time. It reminds me of the civil service exams that were later implemented in China, where individuals had to prove their worth through rigorous testing.
Exactly. It shows that they recognize the importance of selecting capable individuals to govern effectively. Another principle that might surprise you is the emphasis on frugality. They believed that a ruler should lead a simple life and avoid extravagance, setting an example of moderation for the people.
It's fascinating how that idea still resonates today. With all the discussions about responsible consumption and wealth inequality, were there any other principles that struck you as particularly insightful?
One that I find particularly relevant is the importance of listening to advisors and considering different perspectives. The royal regulations stress that a wise ruler should surround themselves with capable ministers who aren't afraid to offer honest counsel.
It's a timeless lesson in leadership, the value of seeking diverse viewpoints and not letting pride or ego get in the way of making sound decisions. But I imagine they weren't averse to punishment when necessary. After all, even the most virtuous society needs laws and consequences.
You're right. While they emphasize moral persuasion and leading by example, they also recognize the need for laws and punishments to deter wrongdoing and maintain order. The texts describe a variety of punishments, from fines and exile to imprisonment and even execution, depending on the severity of the crime.
So their justice system was designed to both uphold moral principles and ensure social stability.
Precisely. Their laws were deeply intertwined with their beliefs about social harmony and the natural order of the universe. For example, many of their laws focused on upholding family hierarchy and respecting elders, reflecting the importance they placed on those values.
It's a reminder that legal systems aren't created in a vacuum. They reflect the core values and beliefs of the society they govern. Now, there's one concept I'm particularly curious about, the mandate of heaven. I remember learning about it in history class, but it would be great to hear your take on its significance.
The mandate of heaven was a central concept in ancient Chinese political thought. It was the belief that a ruler's right to rule was granted by heaven, the supreme power in the universe, and that this mandate could be revoked if the ruler failed to govern justly and virtuously.
So it wasn't just about heredity or military might. A ruler had to prove themselves worthy of this divine mandate through their actions and character.
Exactly. And this concept had profound implications. It meant that even the most powerful emperor was ultimately accountable to a higher authority. And it also provided a justification for rebellion. If a ruler was seen as having lost the mandate of heaven through tyranny or incompetence.
It's like a built-in check on absolute power, rooted in the belief that a ruler's primary responsibility is the well-being of their people.
Precisely. And it's fascinating to see how this concept tied into their belief in filial piety. Just as children were expected to honor and obey their parents, rulers were expected to govern justly and care for their subjects. It's all about fulfilling one's responsibilities within a hierarchical system, whether within the family or the state.
It's a powerful connection. Both filial piety and the mandate of heaven reinforce the importance of acting in accordance with a higher moral order.
Indeed. And it highlights the interconnectedness they saw between the individual, the family, the state, and the cosmos. Each level had its own set of responsibilities and obligations, all contributing to the overall harmony of the universe.
It's a really holistic worldview, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it's a perspective that can offer us valuable insights even today. But I believe it's time we shift our focus to another fascinating aspect of ancient Chinese culture, their everyday lives and the rituals that shaped their interactions. Ready to delve into the world of ancient Chinese etiquette and social customs?
Lead the way. Listeners, be sure to join us in Part 3, as we explore the nuances of daily life in ancient China. From dining etiquette to fashion and spiritual beliefs, it's a journey you won't want to miss. Welcome back to Books and Bites. We're wrapping up our deep dive into ancient Chinese culture and rituals with the Sacred Books of China, the texts of Confucianism. It's incredible how these texts offer us such a detailed glimpse into a world that's both familiar and foreign at the same time.
What I find fascinating is these texts don't just tell us what people did, but they reveal why they did it. They offer a window into the beliefs and values that shape their lives.
And one thing that's been so clear throughout our discussions is the importance of ritual. It's like every aspect of life in ancient China, big or small, was governed by these elaborate ceremonies and symbolic gestures.
Absolutely. Ritual wasn't just about tradition. It was about connecting with the cosmos, honoring their ancestors, maintaining social harmony. It was everywhere, from grand state ceremonies to everyday interactions.
We've already explored the rituals surrounding major life events, like birth, marriage, and death. But I'm curious about the more mundane aspects of life. How do these rituals shape their everyday interactions?
Well, remember how we talked about that strict social hierarchy in ancient China?
Right.
That hierarchy played out in every aspect of behavior, even something as simple as walking into a room. There were rules about who walked first, where people sat, how they bowed, even how they held their hands. It was all about showing respect for those in superior positions.
It sounds a bit rigid to us today, but I can see how those rules would have helped maintain order. In a society that placed such a high value on hierarchy, what about meal times? Were there rituals around how they ate?
Oh, absolutely. The texts describe in great detail how a formal meal was conducted. Guests were expected to arrive early, offer compliments to the host, and wait for the most senior person to start eating before they touched their own food.
It sounds like there was a lot to remember.
There was, even the way they used chopsticks and how they handled different types of food. It was all governed by specific rules.
So were all these rules just about being uptight, or did they serve a deeper purpose?
I think it was more about cultivating mindfulness and respect. These rituals weren't just empty gestures, they were a way of expressing consideration for others and contributing to a harmonious atmosphere. They believed that even everyday actions could be infused with meaning and beauty.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. It's a reminder that every interaction, no matter how small, can be a reflection of our values. What about clothing? We talked about morning attire. But what did people wear on a daily basis?
Just like their rituals, clothing was a reflection of their social hierarchy. Different ranks were allowed to wear different fabrics, colors, and styles.
So you could tell a lot about a person just by looking at what they were wearing.
Exactly. The emperor, for instance, had exclusive rights to wear robes with certain symbols like dragons. Officials of different ranks wore various types of jade ornaments to signify their status.
It's like fashion was a visual language.
It really was.
And just like today.
Fashion in ancient China wasn't just about practicality or status. It was also about aesthetics and self-expression. The texts describe beautiful fabrics, intricate patterns, symbolic motifs used to adorn clothing.
It sounds like ancient China was a visually stunning place, with every detail carefully considered and imbued with meaning. Now, we've talked about the rituals surrounding everyday activities, but I know these texts also delve into the spiritual side of life. What can you tell us about their religious beliefs and practices?
Well, the religious system was a fascinating blend of ancestor worship, nature worship, and a belief in a supreme power often referred to as heaven.
Okay, so let's break that down. We've touched on ancestor worship throughout our conversation, but I'd love to hear more about its significance.
Ancestor worship was really fundamental to their beliefs. They believed the spirits of their ancestors continued to exist after death, and that they could influence the lives of the living.
So they perform these rituals to honor them, seek their guidance, and appease them.
Exactly. And these rituals weren't just performed at home, they were also central to state ceremonies and religious festivals.
It really highlights the importance of family and honoring one's lineage. These rituals weren't just empty gestures. They were a way of honoring their past and seeking guidance for the future.
Right. Now, in addition to ancestor worship, they also practiced nature worship. They believed the natural world was filled with spirits that could influence human affairs.
So it was about acknowledging the power of nature and seeking to live in harmony with it.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of heaven, which was seen as the ultimate source of power and authority in the universe.
So was heaven like a god?
It wasn't personified in the same way as, say, the Greek gods, but it represented the moral order and the source of the mandate of heaven that we talked about earlier.
So it was like a unifying force that connected everything, from the emperor to the smallest creature.
Exactly. Their worldview recognized the interconnectedness of everything, from the individual to the family to the state and the cosmos. Their rituals and beliefs, while they may seem strange to us today, reflect a deep understanding of how everything is connected.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these ancient texts and uncovering the hidden meanings behind their rituals and beliefs. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for their worldview and the wisdom it holds.
Me too. And that's the beauty of these deep dives. They allow us to step outside of our own cultural frameworks and gain a deeper understanding of the human experience in all its diversity.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about. Until our next deep dive, keep those minds open and those books cracked. Thanks for joining us on Books and Bites.